I went to my friend's house expecting an ordinary evening, but the way his mother looked at me, hesitant yet unable to pull away, made me realize some moments don't need permission to become unforgettable. I had been coming to my friend's house for years, long enough that it felt almost like an extension of my own routine. The creak of the front door, the faint scent of brewed tea lingering in the hallway, the way afternoon light spilled through the curtains, it was all familiar, comfortable, predictable. That's why I didn't expect anything to feel different that day. And yet, from the moment I stepped inside, something quietly shifted. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, standing near the counter, sleeves rolled up, sunlight catching the silver strands in her hair. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile I'd seen countless times before, warm, welcoming, but this time it seemed to linger. Not longer in an obvious way. Just long enough to make me aware of it. "Come in," she said, her voice easy, calm. Still, there was a softness in it I hadn't noticed before. I set my bag down and followed her into the kitchen. The room felt smaller than usual, or maybe I was more aware of how close we were standing. She reached for a glass, filled it with water, and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed, barely a second of contact, but I felt it immediately. A quiet warmth spread through my hand, unexpected and unsettling. I told myself it was nothing. Accidental. Normal. But as she moved around the kitchen, I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way she leaned against the counter when she listened, arms relaxed, posture open. The gentle way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she laughed. The ease with which she carried herself, confident, unhurried, like she was fully present in every moment. She asked about my day, about my plans, questions she'd asked before, but this time, she really listened. When I spoke, her eyes stayed on mine. When I paused, she waited. There was no rush to fill the silence, and somehow that made the silence louder. At one point, she stood beside me to reach for something on the shelf above. Her arm brushed against mine, her shoulder lightly pressing into me as she stretched. She murmured a quick, "sorry," but didn't move away right away. For a moment, I could feel the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her sleeve, steady and grounding. My heartbeat picked up, and I hated how aware I suddenly was of myself, how I stood, how I breathed, how close she felt. I glanced at her, half expecting her to pull back, to step away and restore the comfortable distance we'd always had. Instead, she smiled again, smaller this time, almost thoughtful, and went back to what she was doing as if nothing had happened. That's when it hit me. Nothing had happened. Not really. No line crossed. No word spoken that couldn't be taken back. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been noticed. By her. By me. As I sat there, listening to the quiet sounds of the house, I realized this place, once so familiar, now held a subtle tension I didn't know how to name. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was reading too much into simple gestures. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand, and wasn't sure I was ready to feel. The next time I came over, I told myself I wouldn't overthink things. Whatever I'd felt before, those brief touches, the lingering looks, I decided to treat them like coincidences. Familiar spaces can play tricks on the mind, I reasoned. Comfort can blur into imagination if you let it. But she didn't. She greeted me with the same warmth as always, yet there was something playful in her expression now, a spark that hadn't been there before, or maybe I'd just learned how to see it. As I stepped inside, she tilted her head slightly and smiled. "You're becoming a regular here," she teased lightly. "Should I start charging you rent?" Her tone was joking, but the way she said it, slow, amused, made the words linger. I laughed, shaking my head, and replied with something equally harmless. Still, I noticed how she didn't immediately turn away after speaking. She stayed there, arms loosely crossed, watching my reaction as if she were curious about it. We ended up in the living room, sitting a little closer than usual. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could sense her presence beside me. When she leaned forward to grab the remote, her knee brushed against mine. This time, neither of us apologized. Neither of us moved right away. She made small comments as we talked, gentle teasing about my habits, my indecision, the way I always showed up unannounced. Each remark was light, wrapped in humor, but there was intention in it now. Her eyes softened when she smiled, and sometimes she held my gaze just a beat too long before looking away. At one point, she reached over to straighten a cushion behind me. Her hand hovered near my shoulder, then settled there briefly, fingers resting through the fabric of my shirt. The contact was casual, almost motherly on the surface, but it stayed long enough to feel deliberate. I felt a quiet warmth spread where she touched me, grounding and distracting all at once. "You're tense," she said softly, as if she'd noticed my stillness. "Relax." I nodded, exhaling without realizing I'd been holding my breath. Her hand slipped away, leaving a strange absence in its place. What unsettled me wasn't just the touch, it was how natural it felt. How easily she filled the space between playful teasing and something more unspoken. She didn't crowd me. She didn't cross any obvious line. Instead, she danced near it, aware of exactly where it was. I caught myself watching her hands as she spoke, the way she gestured calmly, confidently. She wasn't trying to impress me. That was the part that struck me the most. Her ease, her certainty, it drew me in without effort. There were moments when she pulled back too. When she stood up to refill a glass, creating distance again. When she shifted the conversation to something neutral, grounding. Those moments felt intentional too, like she was reminding both of us to stay aware. As I left that evening, she walked me to the door. She smiled, teasing once more, wishing me a safe trip home. Her fingers brushed my wrist as she handed me my jacket, a light, fleeting touch that sent a quiet rush through me. I stepped outside with my thoughts louder than my footsteps, realizing the tension wasn't imagined anymore. It lived in the pauses. In the careful distance she kept. In the teasing words that said just enough, and no more. By the third time I noticed it, I could no longer pretend it was accidental. The air between us had changed, quietly, unmistakably, and both of us seemed aware of it. What surprised me wasn't the tension itself, but how carefully she handled it, like something fragile that could crack if touched too carelessly. That evening, the house was quieter than usual. My friend had stepped out, and the familiar background noise, laughter, movement, conversation, was gone. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. Every sound seemed clearer, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint rustle of curtains moving with the breeze. She sat across from me at first, legs crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes gave her away. She watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, then looked away when our gazes met, as if reminding herself to keep a certain distance. "You're quiet today," she said eventually, her voice calm but observant. "Just tired," I replied, though it wasn't entirely true. She nodded, accepting the answer without pressing, but her expression softened. She stood and moved toward the window, folding her arms lightly as she looked outside. The simple act of her standing created space between us, and yet somehow made me more aware of her presence than before. "I need to be careful," she said suddenly, not looking at me. The words weren't sharp or dramatic. They were honest. Grounded. My chest tightened slightly. "About what?" She hesitated, then turned back toward me. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching. "About how things feel lately." There it was. Not named. Not explained. Just acknowledged. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The pause felt heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. I shifted slightly in my seat, unsure whether to move closer or stay where I was. Respect held me back. So did uncertainty. "I don't want to confuse you," she continued quietly. "Or myself." I appreciated that more than she probably realized. She wasn't teasing now. She wasn't leaning into the tension. She was facing it head-on, even if her voice betrayed a hint of vulnerability. "I understand," I said, and meant it. She exhaled, shoulders relaxing a little. Then, carefully, she sat back down, but not as close as before. The distance was deliberate. Protective. Still, when she spoke, her tone was warm. When she smiled, it was genuine. She didn't withdraw emotionally, only physically. And that restraint made the moments that followed feel even more charged. At one point, I reached for my phone on the table between us. Our hands brushed again, brief and accidental. This time, she pulled back immediately. Her fingers curled slightly, as if resisting the urge to linger. Her reaction told me everything. She felt it too. "I should probably check on dinner," she said, standing a little too quickly. I watched her walk toward the kitchen, noticing the tension in her movements, the way she steadied herself against the counter before continuing. She wasn't running away, but she was drawing a line. And I respected it. As the evening continued, conversation stayed light. Safe. Yet beneath it, something unspoken remained, humming quietly between us. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door as she always did, but this time she stopped a step away. "Good night," she said, holding my gaze. "Good night," I replied. No touch. No teasing. Just a shared understanding. As I stepped outside, I realized the line between us was clear now, not crossed, not blurred. Seen by both of us. And somehow, knowing it existed only made the space between us feel more alive. It happened on a quieter afternoon, the kind where time seemed to slow without asking permission. The house was filled with soft light, muted and warm, stretching across the floor in long lines. My friend was out again, and though neither of us mentioned it, the absence felt heavier than before, not awkward, just noticeable. She was in the kitchen, moving with a calm that felt practiced. When she noticed me watching from the doorway, she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes this time. There was thought behind it. "Wait. Come sit," she said gently, nodding toward the table. I did, resting my hands against the edge, unsure why my palms felt warmer than usual. She poured tea for both of us, the steam rising slowly between us like a veil. When she slid my cup forward, her fingers brushed the back of my hand. She paused. Didn't pull away immediately. Her gaze dropped to where we touched, then lifted to meet mine. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said softly. The words weren't playful. They weren't teasing. They carried honesty, and something close to regret. Yet her hand didn't move. If anything, her fingers pressed just slightly more firmly against my skin, as if grounding herself in the moment. "But I can't stop," she added, barely above a whisper. My chest tightened, not with excitement, but with understanding. This wasn't a confession meant to tempt. It was one meant to be shared. I stayed still, letting her decide the pace, the distance. She finally drew her hand back and exhaled, leaning against the counter behind her. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure. Not weak, just human. "I haven't felt seen in a long time," she admitted, folding her arms loosely. "And you notice things. You listen." I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "I don't want to make this harder for you." Her eyes softened at that. She stepped closer, stopping just within arm's reach. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, the quiet steadiness of her breathing. "That's why this scares me," she said. "You're kind. And I don't want to cross a line I can't step back from." She reached out then, not to hold me, not to pull me closer, but to straighten the collar of my shirt. Her fingertips brushed my chest, lingering just long enough to make the gesture feel intimate. When she realized what she was doing, her hand stilled. Then slowly, deliberately, she pulled it away. The restraint in that movement said more than any touch could have. "I care," I said simply. "Enough to go slow. Or stop. Whatever you need." She searched my face, as if looking for certainty. When she found it, her shoulders relaxed. She smiled then, a small, grateful smile, and rested her forehead briefly against my shoulder. The contact was light, fleeting, but it sent a quiet calm through me. "Thank you," she murmured. We stayed that way for a moment, close but careful, connected without crossing into something we weren't ready to name. When she stepped back, the space between us felt different, not empty, but understood. That afternoon didn't end with a promise or a kiss. It ended with honesty. And somehow, that made everything feel deeper, heavier, and more real than before. The days that followed were quieter, though the tension between us had not faded, it had deepened. Each time I visited, I became more aware of the subtle ways she navigated our closeness, careful but unguarded in a way that made every glance and gesture feel significant. The playful teasing had given way to something steadier, more deliberate, and I could feel her measuring the consequences of every move, just as I was measuring my own. It was late afternoon when it happened. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the living room floor. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped loosely in her lap, a cup of tea warming her palms. I took the seat across from her, careful to leave a respectful distance, though the air between us seemed charged despite the space. We talked quietly, about life, about plans, about nothing in particular, yet every word carried weight. Her voice had a softness now, a subtle tremor that revealed her inner struggle. She laughed lightly at something I said, but the laughter didn't break the tension, it accentuated it, reminding me that beneath her composure was someone just as human, just as vulnerable as I was. "You know," she began slowly, looking down at her cup, "sometimes I wonder if I should step back completely." Her fingers traced the rim absent-mindedly, and I noticed the slight hesitation in her movements. "But then, I don't want to." The honesty in her voice struck me. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a test. It was a confession, careful and deliberate, that revealed a truth she was grappling with. I set my own cup aside, my palms resting on my knees. "I don't want to make this easier or harder for you," I said, my voice steady. "But I want you to know, I'm aware. And I'm not rushing." Her eyes met mine, searching for certainty. For a long moment, we simply sat there, two people fully present in a room that felt suddenly smaller, warmer, and heavier with unspoken understanding. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned closer. Not into my space aggressively, but enough that the warmth of her body brushed against mine. I felt the weight of her presence, the quiet steadiness of her breathing, the gentle heat of her shoulder. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but respect held me back. Instead, my hand hovered near hers, unsure if I should rest it lightly on the sofa beside her or wait for her to move first. She made the choice for both of us, letting her hand brush against mine, fingers grazing, a touch that was gentle but deliberate. The contact was fleeting, a whisper of intimacy, but it spoke louder than words could. "Do you feel the same?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. "I do," I admitted. "And I want to do this right. Slowly. Carefully. Together." She nodded, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. Then, almost shyly, she leaned her head on my shoulder, not fully resting, just a gesture of trust. The weight of her decision, of acknowledging the connection between us, pressed gently against me. It was grounding, reassuring, and quietly intimate. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't about rushing, or about crossing boundaries. It was about awareness. About choice. About understanding the gravity of what we both felt, and deciding, together, to honor it. We stayed that way for several minutes, quiet, close, and careful. The world outside the window continued its pace, but inside that room, time had slowed, letting us feel the weight of the moment fully. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was real. And it mattered more than anything else. After that afternoon, there was a subtle shift in the rhythm between us. The tension didn't vanish, it became calmer, steadier, like the low hum of a string stretched tight but not snapping. We moved around each other with awareness now, gestures measured, words chosen, but the air felt warmer, softer. It was as though the house itself had recognized the quiet intimacy that had taken root. That evening, I arrived to find her in the living room, the faint scent of jasmine drifting from the small vase on the table. She looked up when I entered, smiled, and my chest tightened slightly, not from desire, but from the comfort of being noticed so completely. There was no teasing this time, no lingering, just the warmth of her presence and the familiarity of her face framed by soft light. We settled into our usual spots, a careful distance between us, yet close enough that our shoulders almost brushed. She handed me a cup of tea, and this time, the touch was softer, almost fleeting, but it carried an unspoken message. Her fingers lingered just a moment on my hand, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat resonate through the small space between us. "You've been quieter than usual," she said, a gentle smile playing on her lips. There was curiosity there, but it wasn't intrusive. It was a recognition of the unspoken tension that had settled comfortably between us. "I've been thinking," I admitted, my voice low. "About everything." She nodded, leaning back slightly, her eyes soft. "Me too," she whispered. "And it's okay to take it slow." We both laughed softly, the sound blending into the gentle quiet of the room. It was the first time since the tension began that I felt entirely at ease with her presence. There was no expectation, no pressure, just a mutual acknowledgement that we were exploring something delicate, together. Then, almost without thought, she leaned just slightly toward me. Not fully, not insistently, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. My hand hovered for a moment, then settled lightly on the armrest of the sofa beside her, careful not to cross any line. She didn't flinch. Her fingers brushed mine ever so slightly, a fleeting contact that lingered in memory longer than in reality. "I can't stop thinking about how right this feels," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't flirtation, it was honesty. Vulnerable, quiet, and grounded. I smiled, and she returned it, that same small, knowing smile that had first caught my attention weeks ago. Without speaking, we both leaned back, letting the moment stretch. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of understanding, trust, and the faint thrill of connection without urgency. Then, as if acknowledging the intensity, she touched my cheek lightly, a brief, grounding gesture. Her fingers traced my jaw gently, and I felt the softness, the warmth, the reassurance of presence. When she withdrew, it was natural, seamless, as if both of us understood that restraint now spoke louder than action. We sat that way for a few more minutes, savoring the calm after the storm of emotion. Her quiet glance, the brush of her fingers, the faint warmth of her body nearby, it all felt deliberate yet safe. For the first time, I realized that this was no longer about teasing or tension alone, it was about letting the connection breathe, allowing space for trust and comfort to grow alongside desire. And in that gentle pause, I knew we were ready for whatever came next, slowly, carefully, and fully aware of the weight and warmth of what we were beginning to share. The evening had settled into a soft hush, the kind of quiet that makes a house feel smaller, warmer, and more intimate. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, fading blue, and the first hints of stars appeared. Inside, the gentle glow of lamps cast shadows that stretched lazily across the walls, filling the room with a sense of calm. It was in this quiet space, familiar yet subtly charged, that we reached the place where everything we'd been feeling could finally settle. We sat together on the sofa, the small distance between us now comfortable rather than tense. The house was empty of everyone else, the usual background noise absent, leaving only the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Her presence next to me was warm, steady, grounding, and I could feel her breath through the quiet air, soft and unhurried. She reached for her tea, hands wrapped gently around the cup. I watched her, noticing how her fingers curved lightly, how the faintest tension in her shoulders had eased over the past weeks. She caught me looking and smiled, small, intimate, like a shared secret. No teasing this time, no deliberate brush of fingers. Just presence. Just acknowledgement. "I'm glad we talked," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of weeks of unspoken emotions. "I was afraid of what it might mean. But it feels right." I nodded, keeping my tone calm but sincere. "It does. And I want to respect it. Respect us. Whatever this becomes, I want it to be real, not rushed." Her eyes softened, the warmth in them deepening. She leaned slightly closer, not pressing, not demanding, but enough that our shoulders touched.